That they shouldn't allow unlimited corporate spending, and ended up in heavily cited in the dissent in Citizens United. I tried to convince New York State that I'd make a good governor, and I came in second in the Democratic primary. So far, I've got a record of losing. But I had a great year. I just wish I was governor. But otherwise, let's talk about what happened. I think I'm just going to tell a few sort of not too inside stories about my experience, and then we can go from there in the discussion. I was teaching law. I was teaching a class on market structure and democracy. I made up this new area of law, and I got an instant message from somebody at the Working Families Party in March. Said, who do you think should run against Andrew Cuomo? And I said, I don't know the answer, but I love the question. And then we brainstormed for a while, and he said, well, would you consider doing it? And I said, no, I have to get tenure. I still have to get tenure. But I'll think of other people. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So the next day I called back, and the next week I basically moved into the Working Families Party office. Said to them, look, you can choose whoever you like, but I want to make the strongest pitch, and I want to learn everything I can. So I spent a month really working out of the Working Families Party office in April, learning a lot, from some extraordinary people there. We went to the convention. A few days before the convention, there was a New York Times, Working Families Party convention, there was a New York Times story. Before this, I understood that Andrew Cuomo had heard that there might be some female upstate law professor. He got 2 out of 3. But the New York Times story was favorable enough that I think he realized that I was very serious about running for governor and running in a very serious way. For what it's worth, I'd always wanted to be involved in politics. I just thought if you lived in New York State, it's so big. How do you do something like that? So I was very excited to run. But he obviously then, I wasn't involved in these negotiations, but got involved in very serious negotiations with members of the Working Families Party. The Working Families Party ended up deciding to endorse Andrew Cuomo. And I just assumed I would step out. But I didn't. I still don't quite understand that moment. I was talking a lot with Mike Boland, who is one of the most extraordinary human beings. And friends, and just an extraordinary person, but also just absolutely brilliant political organizer. And so he and I together decided a few different things. One is that we had a chance to win. And I'm a poker player. I haven't been able to play much the last 6 months, but I usually play every Thursday. And one of the things you know about poker is the question is, can you win? Not are you likely to win? Not are you 51% likely, but if you have good pot odds, there's a lot in the pot, and you got 2 good cards, then it's worth playing. So we were figuring we had 5 to 8% chance of winning. And a 5 to 8% chance of winning a governorship is actually really good. Because you have a 5 to 8% chance of actually transforming New York society and achieving the things that you most care about. So that was enough for us. And the way we thought that it was most likely that I could win is if Governor Andrew Cuomo was indicted. Which seemed possible. And then otherwise it would be very difficult. But we did know that he had a history of incompetitive campaigns making mistakes. And actually, this is really important for the future. I mean, we wouldn't have President Obama but for the mistakes of, what's his name? What? Not Mark Penn, but when he was running for Senate, the sort of shoe-in candidate got in trouble because his ex-wife sued him for taking him to sex clubs.
Right.
Yeah. So no, but this is really important because Barack Obama could not count on winning, and if you don't realize that those in power with extraordinary amounts of money can mess up, you're not going to enter a lot of races. So we knew that Andrew Cuomo had a history of messing up, but everybody in power has a history of messing up. My best friend was just telling me about the army that marched the wrong way for 3 days. The world history is people in power messing up. Andrew Cuomo was not indicted, but I want to talk about two really important things that happened during the campaign. One was he made some very serious tactical mistakes. For one, he chose to take me to trial for not being a New Yorker. This is sort of the birther trial of the 2014. I live in a walk-up apartment. I have lived with friends, and unlike most people who run for statewide office, I don't have real estate. So I didn't have my real estate 5 years to show, to prove that I was a New Yorker. This was a major mistake for him, because he basically financed a 2-day bio ad in a Brooklyn court of an unknown candidate with a name that sounded like an app, who suddenly became a weird, interesting underdog that the governor of New York, who'd been running since he was born, felt like it was important to try to kick off the ballot. And we took that moment, I've been involved in politics for a long time, but we took that moment very seriously, invited all the press to the trial. And I got warts, we saw my warts, but we know that Andrew Cuomo did not expect them to invite the press because the lawyer for the opposing side said, if I knew the press was coming, I would have worn a blue shirt. Which is a major mistake. No, not wearing a blue shirt, but not recognizing the press opportunity. There's Joe Coco. Not recognizing the press opportunity and the fact that this created a fight where there wasn't one. He made a series of other mistakes in terms of his own rudeness, saying that debates were a disservice to democracy is something that, when they say a Freudian slip is that a politician telling the truth or something, I forget. So his mistakes were really important, and a willingness, to be frank, to be vulnerable in the face of mistakes, and a willingness as an underdog team to sort of put ourselves out there and to be criticized, I think was very important. The other thing that was extremely important was the bravery of the groups who did come forward and endorse. The Jim Owls Club was the first to endorse us at a time when we had almost no money. And it made a big difference. It's not that we had mailers that we were sending out, but we could put like one endorsement. The Jim Owls Club, the Social Justice PAC endorsed the following week. These small clubs, and then a series of other clubs in New York started endorsing, and those small clubs and endorsements just meant something when I walked into a town in Poughkeepsie, because people wanted to hear what I was talking about. This is a democratic state that deeply cares about public education, deeply cares about inequality, deeply cares about talking openly about race, deeply cares about criminal justice, deeply cares about so many things, fracking, but they wanted some little signal that they weren't crazy to follow this campaign. And those little signals and little markers were extremely important. The Sierra Club and the New York State chapter of the National Organization of Women ended up probably being the two most important of those, because those are signals that people everywhere understood. And in both cases, I believe, there were extreme amounts of pressure put on members to not endorse. And they each chose in those cases to endorse despite the fact that they were getting extraordinary amounts of pressure. So that actually taught me a lesson for the future, because I think it's important to recognize that all of these clubs are extraordinary sources of power that you may not see. And that getting involved now in whatever that club is, and the power structures of these clubs, has the potential to have ripple effects far beyond what you may ever read about. Another thing that I really learned in the campaign was that some groups are better at others in using. How am I doing on time? Okay. Some groups are better at using campaigns, and I use that generously. I wanted to be used by groups because we had so little money and so few resources that we needed research help. We needed help putting together events. And so some groups give you, I'll give you an example, because something I care about a lot is I care a lot about sort of developing New York as a high-tech hub. There's extraordinary opportunity for a lot of employment. We should have net neutrality in New York. We should and could stop the Time Warner Comcast merger here in New York State. we were getting a lot of attention from some funders on that, but they actually didn't do a very good job of using our campaign to stage events so that we elevated that issue to an even higher level. On the opposite end, you saw the practivists, who were extraordinary at using the campaign to elevate their issue. Now, I care about both of these issues. It's not one or the other. But it really taught me how important it is to not just give money or give the endorsement, but embed yourself in a campaign in a serious way and do the pre-work. Set up the event. Promise that you're going to do the press. Build the infrastructure. And because then you can actually use political campaigns to do far more than that political campaign. And I know you all saw that with fracking, where Governor Andrew Cuomo saw our campaign as an anti-fracking campaign in a lot of ways, in part because the easiest thing in the world was to set up an anti-fracking event with all the facts, all the data, all the support, all the press already there. So those were pretty powerful lessons to me. The other thing I'd say about both the anti-fracking movement in New York and the parents and teachers is something that I saw with the Tea Party, and I'm a student of the Tea Party. I've been to many Tea Party rallies after 2008. Is one of the things that both the anti-fracking movement and the teachers and parents did is they were physically present in front of the governor all the time. I think that's really important, because you look at polling numbers, but the physical presence, politicians are still animals. In good or bad sense. They're aware of those outside. And if you are constantly in the presence of somebody who is saying, I think you are wrong and I am going to be present and I am going to be vigilant, that group is going to have a louder voice in the head of that elected official than the group that just sends in numbers and polling stats. And I think that's something we can do even more of, not just with the governor, but with the state senators and assembly members, so they feel the physical presence of intense power. And I mentioned the Tea Party because I have talked to Congress members who felt extremely brave for standing up to the Tea Party, even in districts where they weren't threatened at all, because they were constantly seeing Tea Party members were harassing them and being present. So, moving forward, what am I going to do? First of all, there is a sleeping giant out there. It's true. I promise you. It did not awake in the 2016 election, and I don't think it's just because of messaging. I think it's because a lot of people didn't feel like the Democratic Party was fighting for them, and they weren't talking directly, not just in like little message box ways, but talking directly to people where they were. I think we have to talk a lot more about power being concentrated in the hands of too few, and aggressively explain how we can bust up monopolies in a serious way. I think we have to talk a lot more and a lot more. I think we have to talk a lot more openly about criminal justice. That's something, there is a sleeping giant out there. And if you want to get young people involved and they see what is happening in the disconnect, I got a big stop. So briefly, I think that I think there's an extraordinary opportunity that involves not just sort of traditional pipeline work, but getting people to run for office who don't traditionally run, people who may have debt, people who may not look like your traditional candidate. Actually change the shape so that people are running for office who don't look like the Manchurian candidate and don't sound like the Manchurian candidate. And that can help sort of wake that sleeping giant up, including getting a lot more young people involved. I'm sorry I was late today because, oh my gosh. What I am doing is I'm shutting the F up, I guess. I'll tell you what I'm doing next year later. Thank you very much.